Now that we've completed our projects, what we're going to do is we're going to create some portfolio assets so you can see how to post your work to a portfolio so you can get something up and out there in the case you want to apply for various educational programs, or even if you want to apply for jobs. So the first thing we're going to do is create some turntables of the various assets we created, in particular of our character. Let's go ahead and open up a scene here. We're going to go to Open Scene, and we're going to utilize our scene file we used under modeling here, which was our texture and lighting setup. So I'm going to click Open. Don't save, and we're going to bring this in. If you remember all the various assets we textured, we went ahead and used this as our lighting base. Now, we will want to make a slight change to this, but let's go ahead and get that set up so we have that change in place. We're going to come to the hypershade here, and the main change I want to make is I want to desaturate my background light. The reason why is when presenting assets, it's ideal to present them in a neutral lighting setup, especially when you're in a place of business. So that way the art director knows the actual colors outside the lighting of the scene. I'm then going to select my skydome light and click my input-output connections here so I can see this. Once this is in place, I'm going to click Tab to bring up my search for a node and type in color correct. And we're just going to grab a color correct here. You'll notice there's an AI color correct and a color correct. I usually just use the color correct, so we'll grab that. With that in place, I'll take the out color of my map into the in color of the color correct, and the out color of the color correct into the in color of my light shape. Now with this color correct, we can use the saturation here and just pull that all the way down to desaturate this to be a neutral lighting color. So now we'll have white light in our scene, but we'll still get the effect from our skydome light. I will then save, so this will save over my lighting setup, and I could go into any of the various files we referenced this into and use that, but we didn't use references. I think we just used imports. So instead, I'll import the files into here. I'm going to come up here to File, Import, and I'm going to import my character rig. Now you notice it's already set to here, but I could navigate to it if it wasn't. And I'm just going to grab the final there and click Import. This will bring it into our file. And if I go ahead and click the lighting here and the textures, you'll see we have nice neutral lighting to this now instead of the blue lighting that we had originally. If I perform a render of this, we'll see that we no longer have that really intense blue, but we see the natural color of this object. We may choose at this time to adjust these values because when you do pipe this into a color correct, you get a slightly different result, but I'm okay with this for this project. Once we have that set, we need to set up a turntable render camera. I'm going to create cameras, create a new camera. We're just going to rename this by double-clicking TT render cam. So that way we have a turntable render cam. And I'll come up here to panel perspective and just set that to the TT render cam. Now for the turntable resolution, let's hop up here into our render settings, scroll down to the bottom, and rather than using an HD ratio, let's just go ahead and switch this to either a full 1024 or a 1K square. I'll do a full 1024 here, and we'll go ahead and turn on our film gate to see the result that gives us. You'll see this has a bit more width, but it has a bit more height. So it's going to give us some nice ratios here. It's 1024 by 768. I could also consider a 1K square. This might be a better result. It will give us a little bit more height pixels than something like the full 1024. 1024 is going to have the width here. So we can decide which one we prefer. Either of these is usually good for assets because you just don't need the extra space most of the time. In this case, I'll use 1K square. Now, my film gate's already ready to go, but in the off chance yours is not, remember you can come down here to the resolution gate section in the film back, and you can switch that from horizontal to fill, and that should fill this in. The next step is to frame this so it looks good when this is spinning, but we also need to get this to spin. Now, if you just try and spin this group, you're going to run into an issue where the controls spin out of control with everything else. So a simple way to do this with a character is to grab the base control here, and at your first frame, hit S, and then at your last frame, rotate that 360. Now, we do want to set this to be a decent amount of time for our turntable, so I'm going to set this to be about 180 frames. Come to the tail end here, and on this one, I'm going to rotate this in Y 360 degrees, and then hit S. And that will give us a full spin on the character. You will notice, however, the character may go off screen at times, so you will want to make sure that it's framed in a way where the character is always on screen. Right now, I actually have that happening just fine, There are some issues with negative space where I might want this to pivot from a different location than it's currently pivoting, but I'm okay with that for this particular project. If I'm satisfied with the placement of my camera, the angle of my camera, and the rotation of my character in correlation to my camera, I can come to my camera here, my render cam, highlight it, and lock its attributes. So we'll just lock those. Now, once that's set, we're ready to refine the animation portion. Right now, it has an ease in, ease out, which is an ideal for turntables. We'll come up here to our Windows, Animation, and Graph Editor. We can select the base control, highlight its animation curves, and just set those to linear. That will remove the ease in, ease out. And now when it spins, we'll just get a nice setup here where it continuously rotates. Now, the next thing we might want to do is change the lighting setup. This is sort of a preference setup, but one of the issues with the turntable in this system is that the highlights follow along the character, meaning that the character is moving, but the lights are not. A simple solution to this is to find the control we have the animation on, which is this one here, find its root location, and then parent the light, both skydome and directional, underneath. The Maya viewport does not like this, so if you hit play, it's not necessarily going to show you the best results, but the renderer will be fine with it, and what we will see is the light will travel with the character so that the highlight no longer travels along the surface. You will, however, want to check the dark regions of the render, the backside, to make sure it's receiving enough illumination to really frame the character nicely. So we can see that there. The next stage is to just calibrate render settings. I'm going to do this somewhat quickly, but what we know will work is under the Arnold section, I'll set camera anti-aliasing to 6, diffuse to 4, specular to 4, and we'll render this out. We'll want to gauge how long this is going to take to render, and we'll want to assess our lighting setup if we like it or if we'd like to change it. This should be relatively quick to render compared to our main scene because we don't have as much going on here. We also might want to consider making some adjustment on our lights. I am noticing some hard shadows that we may want to get rid of. But be mindful, this is going to be a single frame, and at 180 frames render time, it will add up. So just be mindful of that. Okay, so that took about a minute, so we can see that's going to take about 180 minutes, which is roughly 3 hours. That's fairly acceptable. Other things I might notice, though, are things like the shadows, if I like those, or if we'd like to adjust that. In which case, we need to come in here into things like the directional light, and if I want softer shadows to this, I can come into Arnold here, and we could increase the angle here. So I could set this to be a slightly different angle. Let me do a view store snapshot, so that way this is stored. And then we could increase the angle of this to maybe something like 30 or 40 degrees, which will give us slightly softer shadows. The shadows were most prominently seen in the foot, so I can highlight this to get a feel for what these shadows are going to look like across the character and not have to render this for the full minute or so that it's in there. The directional light is our main motivator of shadows, so it will give us the best assessment. Toggling between these two, I actually don't see a difference. I'm going to leave the angle in there, though, in the off chance that it does make a difference elsewhere, and we'll see that when the final sampling is set up. Now, in addition to the samples we have here to reduce the graininess, the anti-aliasing, and the diffuse, we can come down here into the light samples, and for the direct, I'll up this to 2, and for the skydome light, I'll up the samples to 6. At this stage, we can hit render, and this should give us a good assessment of what the final render would look like. At this stage, I also might consider lowering my anti-aliasing down if I'm okay with a slightly lower result for this, because it will substantially reduce render time. And I'll start by doing that just to see if it's acceptable, and I'll set that anti-aliasing down to 3. Just to make sure that it actually refreshes, I'm going to come in here and reopen this and hit play, because sometimes it doesn't save the settings. So now we're going to let this render to its entirety at 3 anti-aliasing. If it looks acceptable, I am going to move forward with this because I want this render to be a little bit faster for me at the tail end of this course. For you, however, I highly advise using at least 6 on your anti-aliasing if you're going to make this a portfolio piece, or even consider taking it all the way to 10, so that way you have as high of a quality of render as you can possibly get. Just remember, it will take substantially longer for the render to complete. You'll see with an anti-aliasing of 3, that only took 30 seconds, so I cut my time in half, and I think this is an acceptable result for me in terms of this final project. So with that in place, I'm going to hit File, Save Scene, and we're going to set this up to do a render sequence. I'm going to come into my settings here. Under the Common section, I'm going to make sure everything's set up here. So we're going to set this as an EXR format. We're going to use no compression since I haven't been using any up to this point. If we wanted to kick out some AOVs, we could. This is the stage where you could consider using an ambient occlusion if you would like. And one thing we might consider is actually using something, because right now the background is showing up. Now, if we don't want that background to show up, which we probably don't, you can click into your Skydome light, scroll down here to visibility, and you can set the camera down to 0. And I highly encourage you to do this so you just get the character on a background like so. Now, ambient occlusion can be a nice addition if you would like to have that on there. I would say it's not always necessary, and it does add a second compositing step, but because we are taking this into compositing anyway, it's something we could consider doing. At that rate, we might as well also shuffle out diffuse and specular. So let's set up some basic AOVs for that. We'll go ahead and just come down here to our diffuse, add that over. We can come down here into our specular, add that over. And then we can go ahead and add a custom here. So we'll just click Add Custom, AO, Create. And over here in the shader, I'll just input the ambient occlusion shader we have down here in Arnold. You'll notice I already have ambient searched in here. But remember, you can type in A and B to get that. And then I'll set the samplings on that up to 6. So now when I hit render, we'll have access to these various passes for the ambient occlusion, for the diffuse, and for the specular. And we can control those in the turntable render. Once we're satisfied with that, we can come to the Common tab, make sure we check the Merge AOVs, so that way we have access to the AOVs there in a single EXR file. We can set our file type to name.number.extension and set our render to be the full length that we're going to have for the duration here, which I currently have set to be an end frame of 180. Scrolling down, we can make sure we have it set to our turntable render camera, and at this stage, we're good to go. So save before doing this, close our settings, and under the rendering menu, we can do a render and render sequence. So that way it will start rendering this out as a turntable. Make sure it has the right camera. Remember, it does not always have the right camera, and in this instance, it does not. So I'm actually going to hit escape on this. We can come here to render turntable camera on this menu. And this will likely crash Maya because it always does. And then we can proceed to try and get it to render the correct camera. So just remember that they do need to fix that. Hopefully they do fix it in the future versions of Maya. I'm going to restart this and continue from there. Okay, so now that we have this in here, let's just double check our settings still saved after the crash. And it looks like they did, so we should be good to go. So we'll just come in here to render sequence. In the render sequence, make sure the turntable render camera is set up. And then if we click render sequence, it should take, and we should be okay to go. So wait to confirm it has the right camera angle. This is taking a lot longer than that first time did on the crash. So I'm hoping it has the correct camera angle because the first one rendered a lot faster because it was further away. So just give it a moment so you can confirm, and then you can let it go and walk away until it finishes. Okay, so that looked like the correct angle to me. I'm going to let this finish up. All right, so our turntable is finished. We're going to go ahead and check it out. So this one did not have layers, so I'm going to have to put this into a folder. I'll just come in here into Images, and we can create a folder for this. So I'll go and right-click, New Folder. And we'll go ahead and create one of these called egg character _TT for turntable. And I'm just going to come from my first frame to my last frame, shift click, and drag and drop them into there. It's always good to double check these once they're done. So we'll just drag it into After Effects, place it in here, and drag and drop, make sure it has no errors. I should just hit spacebar, and it should spin around. And that should give us a turntable. So things to make sure is it doesn't clip off to the side. That is a major factor with our character here. We want to make sure it stays on frame the whole time. And also to check the ease in, ease out. So you'll have to buffer it. With it being an EXR, it is going to take a while, but then after that we can hit play. I don't believe we've done a full turntable of this character yet, so at this stage you may find blemishes in the texture that may be worth correcting. But we looked it over pretty good, so I don't see any major issues with the one I have here. Now, we're not going to get into editing this turntable right now with post-processing effects or anything like that. We're going to get to that later. The main thing we're checking is that it turned out all right. One thing I'm not the biggest fan of is I do feel like the egg is getting blown out to where we don't see the details that great. That might be something I want to correct with the lighting, but for this pass, I think I'm just going to leave it be. We can also see how that looks with an extractor node on there, because that will darken it substantially to the point where it may not be blown out. And it's important to understand when you're dealing with these files that this gamma correction can actually do a big change to the white point. So we go ahead and take a look at that. It still is getting pretty blown out, so that might be something I want to re-render. But as far as everything else goes, it turned out decent. So I might want to adjust that directional light to be less intense in this particular instance. However, I would say overall that's a successful turntable. Now, the next thing we want to do is get a different kind of turntable out of here, which is going to be a wireframe turntable. I'm going to go ahead and save this, just save scene, and we'll create a wireframe setup. Now, the wireframe setup we're actually not going to do in the Arnold render, we're going to do in Hardware 2.0. If you come up here to your render settings, you can swap here to Hardware 2.0, and we're going to go into the Hardware 2.0 settings and just change a handful of things. The first thing we want to do is anti-aliasing. You want to crank that multi-sample up to 16. That way it's all set. From there, we can turn on our render view here. And remember, this is the Hardware 2.0 render, so it's going to look different. We can click this button and we can see how the character renders. Now, to do the wireframe setting, we're going to come down here to Render Options, and we'll have to scroll down to the bottom. But under this section here called Render Mode, you can click on this and you can switch this to Wire on Shaded. And if you go ahead and render now, you'll see it will produce a wireframe on shaded. We don't really want this shaded information though. We want just the wireframe, so that way we can place it on top of anything, be it our textured character or maybe just the ambient occlusion. To do that, one of the easiest things we can do is change this to have a different shader. If we come in here and we look for the egg character geo, we can grab the geometry here, right click and assign new material. And for this one, we're going to use something called a surface shader, which you can find right here. The surface shader is just a flat shader with no shading at all. We can access the surface shader here in the attributes. It's going to be at the very end, and I'm just going to take the out color and make it pure white. After that, I'm going to deselect my egg, and I'm going to re-render this using Hardware 2.0, and you'll see this is the end result. Now, the lines look a little bit thin at a distance, but it shows, the base thing we want to be showing here, which is the topology. Once we have that set, we're good to go. Our render settings should carry over with the size, the camera placement should all be good, and we can just produce a batch rendering. So for this, I'll open up my editor here just so I can see the script editor, that is, to track my progress of my render. And we'll just come up here to render. And remember, for Hardware 2.0, we batch render. So I'm going to click batch render here. So you can see here it says rendering with Hardware 2.0. We're going to let that render. If we pull up our file for our images, we should see this start to populate. And once it's done, we'll have our render. All right, so our render has finished from 1 to 118 here. I'm going to create a new folder here. We'll just make this our egg character WF_TT for wireframe turntable. Then we can go ahead and highlight this top to bottom here, and we can drag and drop this into our turntable document here. Now from here, if we hop over to After Effects, we can come into our project bin, we can drag and drop this into here, and then drag and drop it on top of our character, and it should be overlapping perfectly. So if I hit play here, you'll see that we have that wireframe over the top, and that's exactly what we want, because what we can do is we could come in here now and use something like a multiply to multiply that on top to show off that with the textures. Or if we wanted to not use the textures, we could hop over here to the extractor and we could use something like the ambient occlusion, and now they can get a good idea of how this is built. So we're going to take a look at how to combine this later. Before we do that though, I might adjust my lighting in my render file for the main layer, so we're not getting this super blown out here, because that looks very unprofessional and would not be something I want to present. So I'm going to go through the process of correcting that. But what I want you to do is I want you to produce a turntable rendering of your wireframe, so that way you'll have that on hand to utilize when we get into the process of putting this together as a little turntable video for this character. All right, so go ahead and do that, and then I will meet you back here to put these into a single document to present on a portfolio page. Okay, so I went ahead and I finished up my character wireframe render, and I also did another rendering of my egg, and I changed things up a little bit. I added a rim light to it to make it look a little bit nicer. What we're going to do now is we're just going to combine these together in After Effects to create a little turntable video that we can put on our portfolio page that shows both the character and the wireframe. And this is how we've done this for a very long time in terms of portfolio presentation. You could do this a number of different ways. We could have just done a character layout where we have a front, side, and back, but it's often a good idea to show how to set up and do turntables, because they are a crucial part of showing and presenting your work. So it's kind of a pick your poison type thing, but that's the approach we're going to take. So I'm going to bring these in. You'll see that I have my A character wireframe and my A character turntable version 2. I kept version 1 in case I wanted it. I'm going to drag and drop both of these into here. And then I'll just bring down the main one here, and we can hit play to see our turntable. So this is what the main character looks like now that I've adjusted the lighting. You can see it's no longer blown out in that spot, and we're getting that rim light. I'm not 100% sure why the render actually turned out blown out. If you remember, Maya crashed and I didn't recheck things when I opened it. So maybe it was due to a previous setting, but when I looked at the render preview, it really didn't seem blown out. So I'm not sure why it had that problem, but we fixed it here. Now, as far as this goes, we do want to slap an extractor on here. So we're going to get that gamma corrected. So we'll just place our extractor here. And you can decide if you want to come in and use the layers or not in this instance. It could be a neat idea to just do some of the basic compositing that we've done. Since we have it, we could kick out the diffuse. I could rename this diffuse. Then we could Control D. We could set this one to specular. And just remember to set the blending mode to add. And we could rename this one specular. And then we can duplicate this again. Set the top one here to ambient occlusion. Set this to a multiply, rename this AO. And we want to bring this one down in terms of its opacity, but we can't see that yet. We're going to want to come up here to Layers, New Adjustment, and we'll just create a gamma adjustment here by creating levels and add it to this. And then we can adjust that gamma point to lighten the character up to something we like. So right about here is something I think looks good. Remember, we can bring the ambient occlusion on top of that, though, so it doesn't get lightened with it. And usually with AO, you want to take it to somewhere between 30 to 50%. It varies, so don't use that as a rule. I think in this case, I will take it to 30 so the feet aren't so dark. And then we can hit play to buffer this, and we can see our character in full here, and decide where we want to go from here if there's anything else we want to do. One thing that might be kind of fun is to just push some blooming into there, add a little halo effect around it. It might look nice, might not, but we can take the specular here, Control D. We could leave it under the adjusted gamma, or we can move it above. It'll be a little bit stronger above. And we're just going to set that to normal so we can see it, add a levels to it, so that way we can clamp the values to just the highlighted regions, which is mainly going to be the rim light of the egg there. Then we can give ourselves a fast box blur. Throw this onto here. Give it a little bit of a blur so we get that blooming off of the character there. Maybe not that intense. Or maybe I want to adjust the level so it doesn't have quite as much going on here. That might be a better way to go. Normally I clamp the range, but on this asset I might do something different. But then we can bring that over the top with something like a screen or an overlay or an add. I think a screen in this case is going to be better. And then we can tone back the opacity. Before I do though, I actually am going to bring this under the gamma. So it does get a little bit more range, and just dial in the opacity so it's not too distracting. Maybe we get a little bit of a shimmer there, but not a whole lot. I don't know if I actually like that. I feel like if I use this, I'm going to want to clamp the range a lot tighter. So we get smaller highlights on everything here. If we get highlights at all. So maybe something like that gives a little bit of a shine to our egg. And we could just rename that blooming. All right, so that's going to get us our first chunk here, our first turntable. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring the wireframe on here and extend out our time. So if we take a look at our time, we're going to go into composition settings. We'll just open this up and we'll see it is at 6 seconds. So what we could do is we can increase this to 12 seconds and hit OK. So we're going to double the time. If you do that, you will likely need to drag out your time settings. Now, I'm a little bit surprised here that we didn't see that change happen, but we need to take this range slider to see that. So we'll just pull that out. And then we can bring down our wireframe here on top. And you'll see the wireframe should go right on top of our egg here. And this is where we can decide how we want to use this. So one way would be to use a multiply, and this just puts the wireframe right on top of there. And sometimes this is a little bit hard to see if we're using dark on dark, but we can modify this a number of ways. So for example, since we made this basically white and black, not exactly, but close, you could also use an adjustment layer here of an invert. And you can invert this, and instead of using a multiply, you could actually use something like an add. And we could add this on top to show the wireframe. So we can decide which way we want to do that in order to show it more clearly. Now, this way I feel like is actually harder to read in the highlights and the blooming effect we have. So I might opt to do something like a multiply. We could also decide to show this on something other than the egg itself, such as the ambient occlusion. So we could decide if we want to strip that away or not. But the most important thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to put it on top of something, which means we are going to want to duplicate that over and move it to the next slot. So I'm going to take all these layers here and just hit Control D on them, and I'm going to move them up into their own section here above the wireframe for the moment. And then I can bring the wireframe back on top of them. Then just shift-click all of these and move them over to where they line up with the next time section. So in short, what we're going to have is we're going to have the character turning once this way, and then once the next time section comes up, it's going to turn the next way. One thing I want to make sure I absolutely have is a perfect alignment here, where these are going from one frame to the other. So in short, we shouldn't have a transition between here and here at all. It should just go. Now, this frame and that frame are the same, though, so we can move this over one frame to make it continuously roll, which is really cool, into the next one. So we have to decide how we want to show this, and we could play around with some of these. For example, if I wanted to do the ambient occlusion, I could just set this to normal, and I could set the opacity to be 100, and we could see that's what it would look like with the ambient occlusion. So we transition from this to this, and you can see that does clearly show the wireframe, which is nice. It also kind of shows a little bit less of the detail in the fact that our eggs are just texture splotches, but I think that's pretty obvious either way. So we can decide if that's the route we take. I actually prefer the shaded version though, so I'm going to Control Z and just undo those and leave that as is. And I think that looks pretty good. Now we also need to change something at the end here. At the very end, you can see we have a black frame, and that's because we did move this over a notch. I'm just going to move the timing back one notch here, or even 2 notches apparently. And hopefully what we will get is a seamless turn. So we want this to seamlessly turn from one area to another, beginning to end, endlessly. And it looks like, if I come to the tail end there, we have achieved that. Now, we want to do some fades here, though. We want to fade on our wireframe, and we want to fade off our wireframe. So we're going to do some duplication here to make this work and add some opacity shifts. As far as the fading on the wireframe goes, all we need to do is duplicate the wireframe here, and I'll just name it WF main for that one, and Control D, and we'll make this our WF fade. And with this one, I just need to pull this forward to the beginning so that it aligns with the intro here. And you want to make sure it aligns perfectly. So just be careful to make sure those line up. And that looks good. Now, from here, we're basically going to want to fade it onto this one. So The idea is to have just a fade here to here. Now, I might do a 1 second fade. As far as the character goes, we've kind of seen everything here. Maybe less than 1 second, maybe like half a second fade, or maybe just a few frames fade. It's up to you. You don't want to take too long. So this is at 20 frames. What we could do is basically key this to be 0 here. And then at the very last frame of this one, key it to 100. And remember, this one's going to end, so it's just going to transfer to the other one. So if I go ahead and hit play now, you'll see that what will happen is we'll have the egg all nice and beautiful. Then we'll have a fade transition here of the wireframe coming on top. And as you might have guessed, we're going to want to do this the opposite direction with the wireframe coming off. Now, we have an option here to either duplicate this bottom one and fade it on and off, but a simpler solution is to just take the wireframe on this one and fade it off. So I faded this at a 20 frame marker. So right around here is basically where I want to turn this wireframe main off. So here, I'll key this opacity to 100, and then at the last frame here, we'll just key it to 0. And what that's going to do is just give us a nice little turntable here for this asset that we can put on our portfolio, that when the potential employer hits play, it's going to show our nice little character, the textures, it's going to swipe on the wireframe, and then since it's a turntable, it's going to continue going, but now it's going to swipe off the textures and it's going to restart. There was a little black blip at the end there, so I have to be careful that I get this perfect here, and I might just try retiming this to get it to be exact. Unfortunately, because we have that little gap there that shares a frame, you can see the moment I go off there, it turns black. But if I come here, you see it's at 1128. I can switch my preferences here under my composition settings to this to 11 and then to 8 and hit OK. And now if we hit play, we should have a seamless turntable. We can also decide if we want just a plain black background like this, or if we'd like to add a gradient or some other effect. I'm going to just stick with the plain black background, and I think that will be good. Okay, cool. So now that we have this set, I am going to save it out. I'm going to do a save as. And inside of my Section 5 project here, I'm just going to create a new folder here called Portfolio. And this is something I often do with personal projects, have a portfolio section where I save things to, and we'll just make this our egg_tt and save. And then I'm going to render this to the exact same location. So just like we've done with previous ones, we're going to go to Composition, we're going to go to Add to Media Encoder Queue, and we're going to kick this out into that folder as a H.264 video. All right, so our file is loaded in here. I'm just going to keep the settings we've been using. I'm going to output this, though, to our portfolio folder, which it's already there. We'll just make this our egg.tt, and we'll make it VO1 in case we need to make any version changes, and save. Click our render button. This one should render a lot faster than everything else we've rendered because there's a lot less complexity to it. It's also not HD 1080, so that's going to help a lot. So we'll let this render. All right, so it looks like this finished up. For whatever reason, I put this in a folder, so I'm not really sure what happened there. But we have our video here, and we can check this out. If we click cycle, we'll be able to watch this loop infinitely. The play bar won't show up on our ArtStation page or YouTube or any other website we host this video on, so we don't need to worry about that, but you do want to let it spin a few times just to make sure that it is seamlessly spinning. And there you go. That is how we set up a turntable. So this is going to be no different for any of your other assets. We can do this for our incubator. We can do it for the desk we made. We can do it for the robot. So really, this is just kind of a formula you can use for this project and any project moving forward. Okay? So what I would like you to do is go ahead and set up a composite like this inside of After Effects for the turntable of your egg character. And then we're going to explore setting up a turntable document for our other assets. I'm not going to take it to this extent, I don't think, but I'll go through the process with you just to give you some ideas on how you can approach this for a larger scale scene like what we have here.